So I had some problems with my last video. For some reason, it only uploaded about 8 minutes of it. So I guess just to give you guys more of the video, I wanted to redo it. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about gang recidivism. And essentially what gang recidivism is a tendency for a gang member or a group of gang members to reoffend and recommit crimes. I call it the revolving door of gang crime because that's essentially what it is. In prison, they go into prison committing crimes, they get out, and they continue to commit crimes and go back to prison. So let's get into it a little bit. Okay, so I want to talk about why gangs are such a big problem. In the United States, there's approximately 33,000 gangs, and making up those gangs are about 1.4 million gang members. Now that's a large number. That's the size of the population of, say, San Diego or San Jose, and that many people committing violent and serious crimes, it should be worrisome to some of us. In fact, some areas in the United States, they have estimated that most of their crime, in fact, some say 90% of their crime, is actually gang-related or gang-associated in some way. So you can see on the right in the picture there's a group of prison gang members from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And you can see their group dynamics in a way. Most of them are wearing, of course, the orange shorts, which is assigned to them in prisons, but a lot of them have their shirts off, and their tattoos are very similar or placed in similar ways. So you see there's a lot of loyalty, and there's the group dynamics just in this picture. Okay, so just to briefly talk about the types of gangs, we've got street gangs. Those are somewhat kind of like the local and neighborhood gangs. So in San Jose, there's gangs that are associated to particular streets or particular neighborhoods, within blocks. And from one block to another, it could be a completely different gang or a rival gang. There's also such things as prison gangs, and oftentimes those are associated with the street in a lot of ways. They actually, in prison, they can control both the operations of the gang within the prison and on the outside of the prison. So prison gangs are also very hierarchical, and they follow strict orders and rules, and they even have leadership positions that are very similar to, say, the military or police departments and government type of employers. There's also outlaw motorcycle gangs, and I want to talk about the outlaw motorcycle gangs specifically on this slide because I think it's important to realize that they actually do a lot of publicity on charity work that they do, and they actually do a lot of charity and do benefits for society. But oftentimes these outlaw motorcycle gangs are actually involved in a lot of serious violent crime. So there's various different types of gangs that have very different ways of operating. Street gangs, prison gangs, and outlaw motorcycle gangs, they operate very differently. So what exactly is a gang? Well, as you can see in this picture and then the picture from the prison gang, is that gang is basically a group of people. And in this picture, it kind of shows the types of activities that they're involved in. And that could be stuff like gun possession and violence. But essentially, a lot of what they do is they use fear, coercion, and violence in order to accomplish some sort of criminal type of activity. And they're involved in such things as drug sales, extortion, drug trafficking, human trafficking, robberies, murders and homicides, assaults. They're involved in it all. In fact, in just one block of a gang area, they could be doing all of those types of crimes. Trafficking, human trafficking, like prostitution, where they are making money off of prostitutes who are selling themselves to make money for the gang. And drug trafficking, a lot of times they're selling drugs to make money for the gang. Committing robberies because they want money for the gang, or they want property. They want to achieve some sort of status that they weren't able to achieve in some legitimate kind of way. So talk about the gang's grip on its members. I want to talk about the grip a little bit. What I mean by the grip is the tendency for a gang member to feel so loyal to its gang that it's really difficult for them to leave. Now, I'll talk a little bit later about the idea of blood in, blood out, and what I mean by that is they commit crimes and do violence in order to get in a gang, but in order to get out of a gang, it's very hard. And if you want to get out of a gang, usually what they say is that's by death. You only get out of a gang when you die. So the grip of the gang, a lot of it is dependent on someone self-identifying as a gang member in some way. It gives them pride and makes them feel like they're part of a group. Some of the grip on its members is because of the drug and alcohol dependence. They're addicted to drugs. They can't get off the drugs. The gangs provide them with drugs, and they also make money off of selling drugs, and that can be a lifestyle that they get used to. They also see gang as a form of support for themselves and maybe even their family. For example, in some neighborhoods, they may feel like they must join a gang in order to feel protected by other rival gang members in other neighborhoods. So we've had incidents where normal, innocent kids may be walking home from school, about to go to baseball practice or something like that, where someone may, a gang member, a rival gang from a rival neighborhood, may come up to these kids and ask if they bang. And what they mean by that, do you bang, is do you gang bang? Are you in a gang? And if you are, who do you claim? What gang do you claim? And some of these kids don't know what they're talking about, and they say, no, we're not part of a gang, or we don't know what we're talking about. But these innocent kids who are just walking home from school or going to practice, they end up getting shot, assaulted, and maybe even killed. It's a concerning thing. So you can see why it may be that these kids may feel like they need to join a gang in order to have power by numbers. So let's talk about the prison system a little bit. Not only does gang crime occur outside of the prison, it's very involved within the prison itself, and within the prisons in the United States, there's estimated approximately 230,000 gang members incarcerated in our prisons. Now, that's a large number itself, compared to the other number, the 1.4 million gang members in the United States. But if we have 230,000 gang members incarcerated in the United States, they have a heavy influence of what goes on in these prisons themselves. In fact, I was talking to a kid one day. He was a young, possibly 9 years old, and he even said that he felt like he needed to join a gang or go to prison in order to gain respect in his community. Another aspect to this is that when a gang member is released from prison, he garners some sort of respect out in the street, and even gains a little bit of power. So I think right now what I want to look at is the effects of prison on gang members and how we can combat that element of pride and camaraderie in order to prevent recidivism in these gangs. So just a quick look at the goals of prison, especially in California, here where I'm from. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation kind of sets out several goals in their mission. And one of them is to increase the safety of the public through incarceration. And the way they do that is the most simple way, is just removing these criminal people from society and imprisoning them so that they cannot do crime or victimize people in the free world. Another one is parole supervision, and that means that when they are released from prison on a parole basis, which means, let's say they are doing a 20-year sentence and they get released after 10 years for good behavior, then they must do another 10 years of parole supervision under a parole supervisor that watches what they do, tests them for drugs, for committing other crimes, and they, if they violate that, then they go back to prison, essentially. Then a third goal is the rehabilitation aspect and integrating them back into society. So that's what I'm really concerned about, because I think that with this revolving door of gang crime and recidivism, that we're spending a lot of money on incarcerating them and trying to integrate them back into society when they're released, but it's not working. In fact, in California, we've passed several laws in the last few years where we're releasing more and more prisoners, and that is concerning to me, because I want to know if we're doing an effective job at rehabilitating these people, or is it really not working when we're releasing them into our society. So just to review on kind of what recidivism means, it's just the tendency to reoffend. So some interesting statistics here. One of them being that in 3 years post-release, this one study found that 2/3 of criminals end up recidivating or reoffending. But after 5 years, that increases to 3/4 of the criminals are reoffending. And I thought that was concerning, because obviously isn't working. So if we look at it, 3/4, 3/4, you can say, it doesn't really kind of put into perspective. But if we think about it, if we release 100 prisoners from prison, an entire 75 of them will end up reoffending after release, and that's a huge number, especially if we're considering gangs. Now, gang recidivism itself is even more concerning, because they're of two aspects. I think it's concerning for society because, one, they're at a greater risk of reoffending themselves, and two, they're more involved in more serious and violent crime than other criminals. So when you combine those two aspects of gang reoffense, then we can see that releasing them without proper methods of rehabilitation can be very concerning for our society. So one of the current approaches is the Arizona Department of Correction. Now, I don't want to bash Arizona, because I'm an Arizona State University student, and I'm proud to be. But let's look at their methods and why maybe they failed to reach their goals. So what they did was they identified security threat groups, or STGs. And what that was is that they identify certain high-risk groups and gang members, and they place them into these groups, and they essentially give them two choices. The choices are: you cooperate, you renounce and denounce your gang, and quit your gang. And to do that, you must give up certain intelligence, and that means things like how the gang works, who the leaders are, and maybe even solving many gang crimes that occurred in and outside of prison. So there's that. If they don't do that, and if they don't quit their gang, then they're placed in a maximum security area and facility. So that is kind of what they did. And it sounds like a great idea, that, hey, at least they're isolating them, they're identifying who the players are, and who they need to deal with as the violent and high-risk offenders. But let's look at what happens when you do that. So when you do that, especially with gangs, since gangs are made up of members who are proud and loyal to their cause, and their cause is violence, you may actually be bolstering that gang's reputation and increasing their power within the prison. You're also solidifying that members' reputation among the gang, and their idea that they are a gang member for life, that they are a force to be reckoned with. It also gains respect from other inmates, which is an important part of your safety. If you gain respect from somebody, they're not going to mess with you. They're not going to want to do violence with you because you're a powerful force, and you can do more harm than to them than they can to you, because you have more respect from people. This program also did another couple things. It actually prevented members from seeking rehabilitation by placing them into maximum security facilities. It didn't actually provide them with any incentive to seek rehabilitation. It just separated them. It put them all together, essentially, all these violent people together. And also, it provided a bad incentive to actually quit the gang. So the loyalty to the gang is in that saying that I said, blood in, blood out. And when you're disloyal to the gang, it could even be just a small infraction, but especially when you decide to quit the gang and give up intelligence to law enforcement officials, the consequences of that mean death for that person who quit. And that means a lifelong journey of being worried of, is someone going to come stab me? Is someone going to try to kill me? Even if you're released from prison, because gangs are so involved in and outside the prison, they can tell someone to commit a murder on their behalf from prison. So let's look at an initial hopeful approach of preventing gangs from forming. One of them is the GREAT program. This is a program that occurs in schools before people even reach prison, or hopefully they even reach gang membership. It's lecture based, and it comes from different law enforcement officials who meet with individuals in the community schools. And what they saw was making these connections between law enforcement officials and these kids before they even join gangs. In some areas, in some jurisdictions, they found a 39% reduction in the probability of gang membership after this program was implemented. Now, that's a huge number when you're thinking of these kids' lives and thinking of the possible victimization that they could have committed as a gang member to the society in which they live. So I think this is important because I think 39% is such a great number to see in this program that it may be even able to be applied to actual criminal justice systems itself. For example, the juvenile delinquency program, probation programs, and even the prison system. I think that maybe giving people who are already committing crimes a chance and showing them that they have the possibility of doing things other than the gang can prove beneficial, just like the GREAT program. Okay, so let's look at our neighbors up to the north. Now, I'm talking about Canada here. They're not just good for producing great hockey players and for having great skiing, but they may also have something about gang recidivism in prisons and providing treatment programs that are actually beneficial to these gang members. So they apply the risk, need, responsivity approach in their prisons. And what they mean by that is what they did was they evaluated and found who the high-risk inmates were. So they found who is more likely to reoffend after release. Then they looked at what are the underlying conditions of reoffending, of committing crimes. Why did this person commit crimes? Or why do people commit crimes? So the need. And the responsivity aspect to it is let's apply different methods to each person, because each person has a different condition for why they joined a gang or committed crimes. One person may have joined a gang for protection, while another one may have joined a gang because he thought the thrill of it was exciting. Another one may have been addicted to drugs, and that was his way to get drugs or sell drugs, and so we don't know. But they had an interesting approach. Let's provide an individualistic treatment method to gang recidivism, or recidivism in general. And what they saw was actually, among gang members, a 20% reduction in recidivism. I think that's a huge number. 1 in 5 gang members who live a life of crime and are criminally inclined, and they were able to reduce that by 20%. Now, if we look at the non-gang members reduction, we only see a 6% reduction in reoffense. Now, I think that what that suggests is that the individualistic approach of the Canadian program is actually looking at the underlying conditions of why gang members commit crimes, or why each gang member is committing a crime. They're actually applying the methods not as a catch-all for everyone, but they're treating them as an individual and not just as everyone else, because they may respond. Each person may respond differently than another to different various treatment programs. You can't treat someone who is interested in the thrill by treating their addiction to drugs, or because they joined a gang for protection, you can't treat them for drug addiction. It's because they want the protection is why they are seeking gang affiliation. So maybe what they did was they looked at, well, we can provide you protection. This is how you protect yourself. This is where you should do. Let's talk about how you can protect yourself in the future other than the gang. So a few benefits to this Canadian approach is that, in general, other rehabilitation programs are expensive. But this approach costs a fraction of what other rehabilitation methods cost. Other rehabilitation methods could cost $2 million to rehabilitate someone, whereas this one was estimated to be just $150,000 per person. That's huge cost savings. The other aspect to it is that they provided these gang members with dignity and respect. They didn't tell them that if they didn't participate, they were going to see stricter punishments. They also did not make the gang member quit their gang and make them feel like they're stuck in a corner. So they gave them the respect, and it's possible that they responded with respect. So how do we pay for this type of program, like the Canadian model? Well, the Canadian model has savings itself. So we have so many programs in the United States. Some estimates that some of these rehabilitation programs can cost $2 million per person to rehabilitate them. That's a lot of money per person. But the program that the Canadian services used was only $150,000 per person. That savings can be used to start new programs in prisons in the entire United States. Another way is that a study found that increasing the electronic monitoring outside of prison through parole officers, probation officers, and putting ankle monitors on people or house arrest on the least violent type of criminals, we can actually save billions of dollars per year. In fact, one study found it could be up to $8.7 billion per year. Money be introduced in some other way, in a more effective way, like the Canadian model. So thank you for your time.